one rein to each horse, and it goes straight through from here to the outside of each horse.
When we would go carriage driving, well, first of all, he'd take me on a different route every day, and I do not know how he managed to do that.
There is a young woman in the British royal family who almost never makes headlines on purpose. She has spent a summer stacking bags of compost at a garden centre for £11 an hour. She has spent her 20s training with an Army Reserve unit, mud on her face, a helmet stamped, Windsor, and she has quietly become the person carrying forward one of Prince Philip's most personal passions, his carriage, his ponies, his sport. Her name is Lady Louise Windsor, and because she rarely gives interviews, rarely courts attention, and stands 17 places from the throne, she has become the perfect blank canvas for a very specific kind of story, the secret royal inheritance video. You have probably seen versions of it, breathless narration claiming Queen Elizabeth secretly favored her, that Camilla is furious, that a hidden will reshuffled the royal fortune behind palace walls. Before we go any further, it's worth saying plainly, nobody outside a very small circle of lawyers and family members knows what is actually in Queen Elizabeth's will. That is not a gap in the reporting. That is the point. Her will was sealed by a British court, and under the current legal ruling, it may not be open for 90 years if it is ever opened publicly at all. So any video, article, or script that tells you with total confidence who got which piece of jewelry, or how many millions moved from grandmother to granddaughter, is telling you something it cannot possibly know. What we can tell you is what has actually been documented: her real childhood, her real education, her real relationship with carriage driving, and the real publicly confirmed items she inherited from her grandfather, Prince Philip. That story, without embellishment, is interesting enough on its own, so let's tell it properly. Lady Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary Mountbatten Windsor was born on the night of November 8, 2003, at Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey. Her mother, Sophie, then the Countess of Wessex, had been rushed there by ambulance from the family home at Bagshot Park after a sudden and dangerous complication in the pregnancy. Her father, Prince Edward, was on an official visit to Mauritius at the time and was not present for the birth. The delivery was an emergency, and both mother and baby lost a serious amount of blood. Louise herself was born prematurely and was moved to a specialist neonatal unit in London, while doctors monitored her closely. It was a frightening start to life, and it understandably shaped how her family treated her in the years that followed, with a certain protectiveness that outsiders sometimes noticed. As a small child, Louise was also diagnosed with esropia, a condition that causes the eyes to turn inward, and she underwent more than one corrective surgery. None of this was hidden exactly, but it also wasn't broadcast. It simply became part of the quieter, more private register in which her parents chose to raise her, a register that stood in noticeable contrast to the media intensity surrounding her older cousins, Prince William and Prince Harry. A protective instinct seems to have followed her through those first difficult years. Royal commentators who have covered the family for decades have noted that both the Queen and Prince Philip appeared unusually attentive to Louise in her early childhood, a pattern several attribute directly to how precarious her arrival into the world had been. It is the kind of thing that is easy to overstate in retrospect. Hindsight has a way of turning ordinary grandparental affection into something more dramatic than it was, but it is consistent with what has actually been reported by people with direct access to the family over the years, rather than invented for effect. Louise's parents made a deliberate choice early on. Sophie has spoken publicly, in general terms, about wanting her children to have as normal an upbringing as possible, and to understand that they would likely need to work for a living rather than lean on royal status. That philosophy showed up in small human ways, most famously in the summer of 2022, when it was reported that the then teenage Louise had taken a part-time job at a local garden center, earning an ordinary hourly wage like any other summer employee. She was educated first at St. George's School inside Windsor Castle, then moved to St. Mary's School, Ascot, for her secondary years, where she chose English, history, politics, and drama as her core subjects, a combination that hints at genuine intellectual curiosity rather than a resume built for royal duty. While there, she also completed the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, a youth achievement scheme originally founded by her own grandfather, and received her Gold Award from her father, Prince Edward, in 2026. In September 2022, just days after the death of her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, Louise began an undergraduate degree in English at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, the same university where Prince William met Catherine Middleton 2 decades earlier. During her time there, she worked a part-time job in a university canteen and took part in student theatre productions, hardly the picture of a pampered heiress. She later expanded her degree to include international relations and graduated with a Master of Arts in English and International Relations in July 2026. Reports suggest she is planning a gap year afterward focused on work, volunteering, and travel, rather than stepping immediately into royal duties. In 2024, in a move that genuinely did turn heads among royal watchers, Louise joined Tayforth UATC, the University Officers Training Corps, a British Army Reserve unit made up of students from St Andrews and nearby institutions. Photographs showed her in fatigues, face paint, and a helmet, training alongside her peers with no special treatment implied. It's a path that echoes her grandmother's own history. Queen Elizabeth inspected troops at 16 during the Second World War and later joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, becoming the first female royal to serve actively in the armed forces. Whether that parallel was intentional on Louise's part is something only she could say, but it hasn't gone unnoticed by commentators who follow the family closely. It's worth pausing on how unusual this choice actually is within the modern royal family. Most young royals who eventually take up official duties tend to ease into ceremonial roles, patronages, and public appearances gradually, often alongside university studies or shortly after graduating. Choosing an Army Reserve unit with its early mornings, physical training, and field exercises alongside ordinary students who have no royal connection at all is a considerably less glamorous route, and one that by its nature keeps her largely out of the tabloid spotlight rather than feeding it. By 2025, she had progressed to the rank of officer cadet within the reserve. As of this year, Louise is also reported to be in a relationship with Felix de Silva Clamp, whom she reportedly met during her time at St Andrews. She remains a member of Girl Guiding, an organization her late grandmother served as patron of and her mother now presides over. If there is one thread that runs clearly and verifiably through Louise's public life, it's carriage driving, and it connects her directly and confirmably to Prince Philip. Philip took up competitive carriage driving in 1971 after arthritis forced him to give up polo. He went on to represent Great Britain in 6 World Championships and 3 European Championships, competing well into his 80s, and he became one of the sport's most influential figures in Britain, credited with helping popularize it as a modern competitive discipline. Louise was taught to ride from an early age, and by her early teens, she had already taken up carriage driving under her grandfather's influence. In May 2017, while still a young teenager, she led carriages at the Champagne-Laurent-Perrier meet of the British Driving Society during the Royal Windsor Horse Show. In 2019, she competed in the private driving singles event at the same show, and placed third with Philip reportedly watching proudly from the sidelines. Philip died on April 9, 2021 at the age of 99. At his funeral at Windsor Castle, 2 of his fell ponies, Balmoral Nevis and Knotlaw Storm, stood beside a dark green carriage as the funeral procession passed. On the carriage seat sat his driving cap, his gloves, a whip, and a small red tub he used to hold sugar lumps for the pony's quiet, personal details that spoke to decades spent in that particular hobby. It was reported at the time, and has since been widely confirmed, that Louise inherited that carriage along with the 2 ponies. This is one of the very few specific inheritance claims about this family that rests on solid reporting rather than speculation. It was covered by outlets including Hello, The Telegraph, and Tatler, and Louise has continued to act on it publicly ever since. In 2022, she drove one of Philip's carriages at the Royal Windsor Horse Show in front of Queen Elizabeth, who was seen watching from the stands. By 2024, competing under the name Mountbatten Windsor, she placed second in her class at the British National Carriage Driving Championships. In 2026, She took on a more organizational role at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, working as part of a concierge and coordination team for the event. None of that required tabloid speculation to establish. It's simply what happened, in public, in front of witnesses and photographers, over the course of several years. It also helps to understand why carriage driving mattered so much to Philip in the first place, because it explains why passing it on to Louise carried real emotional weight, rather than being just another item on an inventory list. Philip had been a competitive polo player for decades, one of the sports most associated with his public image in the mid-20th century. When arthritis in his wrists made polo untenable in the early 1970s, he didn't simply retire from competitive sport. He sought out something else entirely, at an age when many people are winding down rather than starting new competitive pursuits. He became one of the sport's early codifiers in Britain, helping to establish rules and standards that carriage driving competitions still use today. That he found, decades later, a grandchild who took to the sport naturally and wanted to learn it from him directly was, by every account available, something that visibly pleased him. Hence photographs of him watching her compete, and hence his decision, made known to the public shortly after his death, that his own carriage and ponies should go to her rather than simply being retired or sold. A lot of the confusion and a lot of the sensational claims around royal inheritance comes from people conflating two very different pots of money, so it's worth untangling them plainly. The first is the Crown Estate, a vast portfolio of land and property, including palaces like Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, worth many billions of pounds. This does not belong to the monarch personally. It belongs to the institution of the monarchy and is managed on behalf of the nation by an independent board. It passes automatically from sovereign to sovereign. No individual inherits it the way you would inherit a house from a relative. The second is the monarch's genuinely private wealth money and property owned outright by the individual, separate from the crown. For Queen Elizabeth, this included Balmoral Castle in Scotland and the Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, both purchased privately by her family generations ago, along with personal jewelry, a stamp collection inherited from earlier monarchs, racehorses, art, and an investment portfolio. Estimates of this private fortune have varied by source and year. The Sunday Times Rich List and Bloomberg's Billionaires Index have each put figures somewhere in the range of £270 to £370 million at different points, though these are estimates by financial researchers, not confirmed totals from the palace itself. There genuinely is a 1993 agreement, negotiated with John Major's government, exempting sovereign-to-sovereign transfers of this private wealth from the UK's standard 40% inheritance tax. The reasoning given at the time was that the monarchy needs financial continuity and independence from the government of the day. That part of the story in circulating videos is accurate. The logic behind that exemption is worth understanding on its own terms, because it isn't unique to the royal family, even if it's often framed that way. UK inheritance law already carries similar carve-outs for family farms and certain businesses, specifically so that working assets don't have to be broken up or sold off just to cover a tax bill when they pass to the next generation. The 1993 memorandum applied that same underlying principle to the monarchy, protecting properties like Sandringham and Balmoral, which combined private use with official royal functions, from being eroded generation after generation by repeated 40% tax bills. Whether that arrangement is fair given the scale of wealth involved is a matter of ongoing public and political debate in Britain, and reasonable people land in different places on it. But it is a real, documented agreement, not a rumor, and not something invented to explain away the family's wealth. It's also worth noting what does not fall under this private category, since a lot of confusion comes from lumping it in anyway. The crown jewels, the royal art collection,